The first time the falcon appeared, the sky was the color of cooled ash, and the wind carried that slow, dry silence that happens right before something changes. The old man sat alone at the edge of the market, leaning against a cracked pillar, his hands wrapped around a chipped clay cup. He watched people move through the dusty street like flowing threads, each one pulled by some invisible hand of need or fear or hope. Above them, the falcons circled, dark wings cutting through the sky with the calm of something that had already seen how the day would end. The old man had lived long enough to know that some birds were just birds, and some were signs. This one felt like a sign. Its shadow skimmed over the merchant's stall, over the traveler's cloak, over the boy who chased a stray goat with more heart than sense. The falcon passed over them all, then returned to circle above the old man, as if drawing a circle around him, closing him in with the weight of time and memory. The market smelled of spices, sweat, and hot bread. Lanterns hung from curved iron hooks even in daylight, their glass mouths waiting for fire when the sun finally lost its grip. Between the stalls, the world felt small and noisy and human. But beyond the walls of the city, the desert stretched out in a wide, empty hush, like a page waiting for a story that someone hadn't dared to write yet. The falcon flew that line between noise and silence as if it belonged to both. Near the fountain that trickled in the middle of the square, the merchant arranged his wares with careful hands, stacking metal bracelets and glass vials of perfume that smelled like rain in places that barely remembered rain. He was a sharp-eyed man, always counting, always measuring. He saw the falcon and shrugged the way a man shrugs at clouds. To him, fate was just numbers and timing. If you bought low and sold high, life worked. If you missed your chance, that was on you, not on some bird in the sky. At the fountain's edge stood the traveler, dusty from the road, cloak stained with a journey that had not been kind. The traveler stared into the water, watching his reflection ripple and break with each falling drop. In his eyes lived a tired kind of hunger, not for food, but for something like meaning or direction. When the falcon's shadow crossed his reflection, his fingers tightened on the worn leather strap of his bag, as if he felt some unseen hand tap him on the shoulder. The boy noticed the falcon before anyone else. He always noticed things other people missed. He saw how the bird's path cut the sky like a stroke from an invisible brush. He saw how the falcon moved without hurry, like it had all the time in the world, like time itself worked for it, not against it. The boy nudged the woman beside him, the woman who sold dates and smiled in that tired way. People smile when they've survived more than they've dreamed. She glanced up, nodded, and went back to her customers. Birds were birds. Life went on, but the old man didn't look away. He watched the falcon circle as the first hint of evening slid across the sky. Lanterns were lit one by one, tiny suns appearing in the darkening streets. The city shifted from heat to glow. Somewhere, a scribe unrolled a scroll and prepared to record another day's debts and deals. Somewhere else, a soldier checked his sword by habit, even though no battle waited. Life was a loop, the old man thought. Different faces, same fears, same mistakes. The falcon descended, slow and deliberate, and landed on the broken arch of one of the old city gates. Its eyes were sharp, unblinking. Its chest rose and fell with quiet power. Even from a distance, the old man felt its gaze like a weight on his shoulders. The bird tilted its head as if measuring the city, as if reading something written in the space between people. A tall, dark man moved through the crowd with a purpose that made people step aside without knowing why. He wore a simple cloak, but he moved like someone used to command. His eyes drifted between shadows and faces, as if searching for someone, or maybe searching for the version of himself he had lost along the way. When he reached the fountain, he paused, sensing the falcon above him, feeling that strange itch on the back of his mind, the one that whispers that life is about to split into a before and an after. The king lived in a palace at the far end of the city, a place of marble and carved wood and tall, watchful windows that looked out over the desert, like eyes that refused to blink. People said the king was wise. People also said the king was tired. Both things could be true at the same time. That evening, he stood by his balcony, hands resting on the cold stone, watching the same falcon drifting in the sky far above the crowded streets. He did not know why, but he felt a chill, even though the air was still warm. In a small room behind the market, The scribe dipped his pen into ink and drew lines across a page with careful strokes. He recorded the debts of the merchant, the fine on the traveler for entering late, the tax on the woman's little stall of dates. He wrote numbers next to names, but he did not write the fullness of their stories, the quiet wars inside their hearts. Numbers were neat, lives were not. Sometimes when the ink dried, he caught his reflection in the polished metal beside his desk and wondered if fate was just a book like his, written by a hand that never ran out of ink. By nightfall, the city glowed like a bowl of scattered stars. The wind picked up, cooler now, carrying the scent of sand and distant rain that might never come. In a corner of the square, the old man lit a small lantern and set it beside him, the flame flickering like a heartbeat. The boy sat at his feet, having slipped away from the woman's stall for a moment of curiosity. The old man, without thinking, began to speak, because that was what old men did when nights grew long and birds circled like questions in the sky. He spoke of a story almost no one remembered anymore, of a time when the city was smaller and the sky seemed bigger, and the falcon was not just a bird, but a sign carried by the wind. He spoke of a warrior who once stood where they stood, a warrior who believed fate was something you could cheat if you were fast enough, if you were ruthless enough, if you cut corners and hearts with equal precision. The boy's eyes grew wide. The falcon shifted on the broken arch as if listening. In that old story, the warrior had made a deal in the desert. He had been lost, dying of thirst, when a stranger wrapped in white cloth appeared out of the heat shimmer, like a mirage that refused to vanish. The stranger had offered water that tasted like melted stars, and in return, he had asked only for one thing. The warrior's promise to follow a path that would change the city forever. The warrior, desperate and young, had agreed without reading the fine print written in the sky by wind and sand. The old man's voice grew soft as he described how the warrior rose in power, how doors opened for him like pages in a book, how enemies fell, how the city grew under his hand. But there was a catch, as there always is. For every victory, something small went missing. A kindness not given, a mercy withheld, a truth bent just enough to stay profitable. The warrior didn't notice at first. Life looked good. People praised him. Fate, it seemed, was on his side. The falcon, the old man said, had appeared one evening on the palace roof, watching the warrior with eyes that saw deeper than armor and titles. From that day on, every time the warrior chose selfishness over compassion, the falcon flew lower. Every time he chose fear over honesty, the falcon's shadow grew darker, until one night, the bird landed beside him, close enough for him to see his own face reflected in its eyes, and he realized, too late, that the stranger in the desert and the falcon in the sky were just mirrors, different shapes. Same truth. The boy shifted, unsettled. He asked why the warrior didn't just stop, didn't just choose differently. The old man smiled with that weary curve of the mouth that comes from knowing how hard it is for people to change when every bad habit is dressed up as survival. People, he said, like to blame fate for choices they made with both eyes open. It was easier to say the falcon made them do it than to admit they had steered the ship straight into the storm. As the old man spoke, the traveler listened from the edge of the crowd, leaning against a pillar, heart tightening in ways he didn't fully understand. The story felt personal, like somebody had quietly slipped his memories into the old man's mouth. The traveler had his own desert deals, his own promises made in fear, his own bends in the road where he had chosen comfort over courage. He had left a woman behind in another city, a woman who had believed in his better self even when he didn't. He had walked away instead of staying, and fighting for a future he thought he didn't deserve. The merchant, stacking coins at his stall, heard the story in fragments. Words like warrior, stranger, deal, and falcon drifted over to him like bits of ash from a distant fire. He shook his head and focused on his money. Stories didn't feed families, he told himself. Numbers did. He remembered, though, the day he decided to cheat a widow on the price of her late husband's cloak. No one had seen. The numbers on his page had smiled that day, but something inside him had gone a little quieter. The tall, dark man, passing by with his own worries, caught the old man's line about blaming fate. It landed in his chest with a sharp, uncomfortable weight. He had spent years telling himself that the things he had done, the raids, the broken oaths, the scars left on other lives, were written somewhere beyond him, in some script he couldn't edit. It felt safer that way, because if fate wasn't the author, then he was. And that meant the guilt had nowhere else to live but inside him. High above, the Falcon launched itself into the air again, wings catching the moonlight now sliding across the sky like spilled silver. It flew in a wide arc over the city, over the palace, over the market. Its shadow passed over the fountain, where the water reflected the moon like a coin tossed into a wishing well. For a heartbeat, the reflection of the bird and the moon overlapped in the water, as if tying the sky and the earth together with invisible thread. In the palace, the king stepped back from the balcony, the image of the falcon lingering in his mind. The kingdom was changing. Beyond the desert, far on the horizon, there were whispers of cities with towers of glass and metal, lights that chased away night, machines that moved faster than horses, voices carried through wires and air. Some of his advisors wanted to open the gates wide, to chase this new world. Others wanted to lock the doors and pretend time was an obedient servant, not a storm. The king felt torn, standing between the old world and the new like a bridge that wasn't sure how long it could hold. He walked through halls lined with mirrors framed in gold. In each reflection he looked a little different, younger in memory, older in fear. He paused in front of one mirror and saw, just for a moment, the falcon's shape instead of his own. It was probably just the lantern light flickering, but it chilled him anyway. He wondered if his decisions, written in laws and carried by soldiers, would someday be read by history as wisdom or cowardice. Fate, he thought, was just what people called the long echo of their choices. Below, the scribe put down his pen and flexed his cramped fingers. He stared at the columns of numbers, the neat rows of ink that decided who lived comfortable and who struggled. He knew the taxes on the poor were heavier than they should be. He knew certain names never appeared on his pages, even though everyone knew they should. There were invisible rules floating in the air, unspoken deals made in quiet rooms. He had told himself again and again that this was just how things worked. But tonight, with the old man's story lingering in the air, that excuse felt thin. The wind shifted stronger now, carrying the sound of distant thunder from beyond the dunes. A storm was building somewhere out there, rearranging sand that had been still for years. The city's lanterns flickered. For a second, the square held its breath, like someone had hit pause on time. Then the falcon dove. It streaked across the market so low that people ducked. The boy flinched, then laughed nervously because sometimes fear wears the mask of excitement. The merchant dropped a coin, watching it roll into a crack between stones gone for good. The traveler felt his heart jump as the bird's shadow crossed his chest. The tall, dark man reached for the hilt of a sword that wasn't there anymore, fingers closing around empty air. Old habits died slow. The falcon landed on the rim of the fountain, talons gripping stones slick with water. For a moment, everyone nearby fell silent. The square, usually full of voices, went oddly still. Even the fountain seemed to quiet, drops falling in slow motion. The bird tilted its head and stared at its own reflection. In the rippling water, the falcon's shape blurred and fused with the pale circle of the moon. It was as if the sky had come down to look itself in the eye. In that silence, people saw themselves in the reflection without really meaning to. The traveler saw the crossroads he had run away from. The merchant saw the widow's eyes when she realized her husband's cloak had been sold too cheap. The tall, dark man saw the village he had burned in the name of some cause he no longer believed in. The scribe, who had wandered into the square without thinking, saw the names missing from his books like ghosts standing between the lines. The old man's voice returned, softer now, more like a prayer than a story. He said that the Falcon of Fate did not come to punish or rescue. It came to reflect. Its wings were made of choices. Its eyes were mirrors. It waited on the edges of people's lives, not to write their stories, but to remind them they were the ones holding the pen. The bird did not bring destiny. It brought clarity. And clarity, he said, was scarier than any curse. The boy asked if the warrior in the old story had ever changed. The old man sighed and said that some say he did. That one night he walked into the desert alone, without armor or sword, following the falcon into the dark. Some say he never came back. Some say he returned years later as a quiet, nameless wanderer who helped strangers at wells and never spoke of his past. The truth was probably somewhere in between, as it usually is. The thunder rumbled again, closer now. A few fat drops of rain fell into the square, hissing when they hit hot stone. People looked up in surprise, as if heaven had glitched and sent water to the wrong place. The falcon spread its wings, shaking off droplets, then launched into the air once more, climbing higher and higher until it was just a dark speck against a sky that suddenly felt bigger. That night, small things shifted in quiet ways. The merchant took a coin from his own pocket and slipped it to the widow when no one was watching, telling her he had miscounted. It wasn't much, but it was something. The traveler sat by the fountain and wrote a letter he had been avoiding for years, words spilling out like water finally breaking through a cracked dam. The tall dark man turned away from a job he knew would hurt people, even though it meant losing money he thought he needed. The scribe went back to his desk and, for the first time, wrote down a powerful name that everyone had always pretended not to see. Up in the palace, the king stood again on his balcony, watching the distant flicker of lightning over the dunes. He ordered that the taxes on the poorest be reduced, just a little at first, knowing some would fight him on it. He also sent for travelers and wanderers, people like the dusty man at the fountain, to hear about the world beyond the desert, not just from polished diplomats, but from those who had walked its rough edges. He did not know if it was enough, but he knew it was a start. Deep into the night, when the market had emptied and the lanterns burned low, the old man sat alone again at the edge of the square. The boy had fallen asleep with his head against the woman's lap, dream tangled with story. The old man watched the last embers of a nearby brazier, the way they glowed and faded, the way fire and shadow danced together. In the reflection of a puddle near his feet, he thought he saw wings for a second, dark and steady. Before the water stilled, he realized then that people waited for miracles like thunder and lightning. Loud and obvious, but most of the time fate moved like a falcon's shadow, quiet, passing over you while you argued about prices or worried about tomorrow. You didn't notice it until something inside you shifted, until you found yourself doing one small, brave thing differently than you had the day before. In the end, the old man thought, the Falcon of Fate was not some magic bird that decided your life for you. It was that moment when the mirror stopped lying, and you saw who you were becoming, clear as moonlight on water. That was the real test. Not whether the bird flew over you, but what you did when you finally recognized your own reflection. The moral. Though he did not speak it out loud, settled over the square like a soft cloak. Fate was not a storm hunting you. It was a story you kept telling with every choice, every hesitation, every act of greed, every small kindness. The falcon did not write that story. It just flew above it, watching, waiting, ready to show you, in one sudden flash of shadow and light, exactly who you had become. And if, on some nights, when the wind is just right and the moon sits low over the desert, you look up and see a dark shape circling high, cutting across the stars like a moving comma in the sky, maybe that's your reminder. Not that everything is already written,